Hi, I'm Mr. Nance, and I'm out here in my shed in the middle of the night to talk to you about the Tempest. Why am I in my shed in the middle of the night? Well, because it's summer, and I don't want to wake up the babies. Obviously. Shakespeare's Tempest is different from a lot of his other plays because Prospero, our hero, never really has that many threats against him. He pretty much is in control the entire time, and the one minor threat from Caliban is easily brushed off. Instead, his threat might really come from within. See, this is a play about power, and everybody is struggling for power, everybody is trying to gain power. And perhaps our biggest threat to Prospero is his power. He has all this power over everyone around him. He was once powerless, but now he's got it again. Is he going to use his power appropriately? That's really the question we're asking in this book. So there's a whole lot in this book, but I don't have time or energy tonight to get into all of it. So I'm going to go ahead and start by just summarizing each of the sections, each of the acts, and then maybe touching on a few things that I think are pretty key. Act 1, as you'd expect from a Shakespeare plot diagram, is the exposition. We are introduced to the characters, we're introduced to our problem, but in this particular play, there's a lot of backstory to lay out. I mean, scene 2 is really just backstory after backstory after backstory. It starts with a boat who's in terrible trouble because of a tempest or a terrible storm. And everyone thinks that they're gonna die, the boat seems to break apart and go down, and all the people are screaming as it goes down. Then we cut to scene 2, where we're meeting Prospero, our hero, and his daughter Miranda. And Miranda's upset because she's seen this boat go down, and so she begins to ask her father what's going on, and her father tells her, yeah, I did that with my magic. He then proceeds to give a lengthy backstory about where he comes from and who he is, and who Miranda is. They're on this deserted island, and they're the only two inhabitants other than the natives, who are not really human. See, Prospero used to be the Duke of Milan, but he wasn't a very good duke because he spent all of his time reading instead of being a duke, and he gave all of his authority to his brother. Eventually, his brother usurped him and tossed him out. Prospero would have been killed except for the kindness of one of his servants, and he was set adrift with a little bit of food and water on a tiny boat. He also happened to have his magic books, which helped him to find this magical island whereon he found some magical creatures who increased his power. Miranda falls asleep, and then we get introduced to our first magical creature, Ariel. Ariel is a fairy who was trapped in a tree, and then Prospero saved him. Now Prospero uses him as a servant to do all of his magic bidding. And Ariel really wants to be free and be out from under Prospero's power so that he can enjoy himself and do all of his own magical things. Think maybe Aladdin and the genie, but Prospero really wants to hang on to Ariel because Ariel is sort of the source of a lot of his power, and so he doesn't really want to let him go, and he keeps sort of putting Ariel off throughout the book and saying, oh yes, it's almost time for you to go, but you just have to do a few more jobs for me. And we begin to wonder whether he's going to let Ariel go at all. Finally, we get introduced to the other non-human inhabitant of the island, Caliban, who really claims the island as his own. He's a monster offspring of this evil witch. When we first meet Caliban, he's being treated as a slave. He's forced to gather sticks and do his master's bidding, and he's frequently beaten and pinched by magic, and it seems like a pretty rough deal. And he also complains that this is his own island, and when Prospero and Miranda arrived, they taught him how to speak, and they treated him well, and then now they treat him terribly. We also get the backstory that there was a point at which Caliban attempted to rape Miranda, which is why he's being treated like this. But there's an underlying theme of post-colonialism here. We have these Europeans who are coming in, finding this beautiful Edenic island, and then enslaving the inhabitants, which is not uncommon, of course, during this time. This is an age of exploration, this is an age of colonization, this is an age of imperialism. So Caliban could be seen as the savage, the person that the civilized European attempts to conquer and control and teach good things. After all, they teach him language. But what's the benefit of teaching him language? Because, as he says, the only thing he's gotten out of it is the ability to curse. Not a particularly good thing. So backstory. Why is this ship going down in the first place? Well, it just so happens that Prospero has finally got all of his enemies in one place. His evil brother, who overthrew him, as well as the king of Naples, who helped the evil brother overthrow him, are all together in a boat, and the boat is just in his reach, and so he's causing them to think that they're sinking, and he's going to throw them on his magical island where he's going to capture them and teach them a lesson. How he's going to teach them a lesson, and is that lesson going to be good? We'll find out. Finally, at the end of Act 1, Ariel, the fairy, leads Ferdinand, who's the son of the King of Naples, one of the men on the ship, up to Prospero and Miranda. And when they see Ferdinand, Prospero acts like he's this evil spy, but Miranda is completely struck by him, and she's like, wow, that guy's gorgeous. Of course, she's never seen another human being before, other than her father, and so the first man she sees does appear to be pretty attractive. Prospero uses his magic to freeze Ferdinand and then enslaves him. Not because he wants to be a real jerk to him, but because he sees the eyes that Ferdinand and Miranda are already making at each other, and he wants to give them some adversity so that they are strengthened in their affection. Prospero's real goal is to marry Miranda to Ferdinand, but he wants it to be on his terms, because if Miranda marries Ferdinand, then his line becomes the heirs to not only Milan, but also Naples. Power. So now we proceed to Act 2, which is of course the rising action. Scene 1 of Act 2 details the explorations on the Isle of our castaways. There's the King Alonso of Naples, who is heartbroken because he has seen his son, Ferdinand, thrown overboard and sunk. There's also the evil Antonio, who was Prospero's brother, who usurped him. So these two men work together to get rid of Prospero, and now Prospero has them in his power. There's also another man named Gonzalo, who is a good-hearted man who helped Prospero in his dire straits and gave him his magic books and rescued him. So Prospero has a lot to thank for Gonzalo, and so he's wanting to help him here. And there's Alonso, the King of Naples' brother, Sebastian, who Antonio is buddying up to. Now they're wandering around this isle. Alonso is weeping and grieving because he's seen his son drowned, and Gonzalo is trying to make the best of everything and saying a lot of very silly things. A lot of this language of idealism and utopia and romanticism, as if, oh, this world is so Edenic and so it's so pure and so perfect. If I could make a kingdom here, and he describes his perfect kingdom, but of course everything he says is contradictory. And in the background, Sebastian, who's not that bright, and Antonio, who's a bit more clever, are making fun of him and mocking his speech. Finally, Ariel arrives to make sure everything's going according to plan, and plays some music, causing them all to fall asleep except for Sebastian and Antonio. Now, once Sebastian and Antonio are alone and everyone else has fallen asleep, Antonio has a brilliant idea. After all, he asked for help from Alonso and got help from Alonso, but now he owes Alonso some tribute, and he kind of owes him some favors, and so he's under his sway. He doesn't like that very much, so he thinks, how can I get out from under Alonso, who I used to get rid of my brother? And so he begins to buddy up to Sebastian and suggest that Sebastian, as the brother of Alonso, could murder Alonso in his sleep and become the King of Naples. So, earlier, as we noticed, Antonio got rid of Prospero so he could become the Duke of Milan, and now he's trying to get Sebastian to get rid of Alonso so he can become the King of Naples. And when he does that, Antonio will be free from his obligations to Naples. Of course, this evil treachery is overheard by Ariel, who, at the last minute, wakes everyone up just as they're standing over Alonso with swords. And so they have to come up with a quick story saying, hey, I heard lions and I was pulling my sword out to protect you, or something. But we see that Antonio is just as treacherous as always, and Sebastian is also treacherous. Scene 2, more rising action. We get to see more of Caliban and what's going on with Caliban. Caliban is doing his duties, carrying sticks, but the storm is scaring him, and so he crouches down on the ground and pulls a blanket over his head. He also hears someone coming. It turns out that there's a couple of servants on the boat, a couple of boat hands, who are clowns in the Shakespeare's play. They're very goofy and are the type of characters that do a lot of slapstick and a lot of comic speech, as we'll see in a lot of Shakespeare plays. Anyway, Trinculo runs into Caliban and crawls under the blanket with him because the storm is so terrible, even though he sees that he's this crazy fish monster thing. In a moment, they run into Stefano, who has happened to save a keg from the ship, and all of three of them begin to get drunk. Now, when Caliban begins to drink the liquor that these two drunk shipmen have brought ashore to him, he gets very drunk, and he begins to think that they must be very powerful to bring this wonderful drink. Now here we might see some connections to the liquors that the Europeans brought to America and gave to the Native Americans, causing all kinds of problems and alcoholism. And though the alcohol did seem miraculous at first to the natives, it certainly didn't do anything good for them. We see that same problem here. So Caliban throws off his bonds and feels like he's free to serve a new master. Forget Prospero, I'm serving a better master, this clownish boatman. Now, our real problem here is that Caliban frees himself to submit himself to a new and, in fact, inferior master. Instead of freeing himself to own his own island and to self-sufficiency, he just subjugates himself again. Act 3 opens with Ferdinand again, who's been working very hard chopping wood, as a good slave should. And Ferdinand, the son of the King of Naples, the Prince of Naples, the son of Alonso, who Alonso thinks is drowned. And here's Miranda sneaking up to give him some encouragement and tell him she's so sorry that her dad's being a jerk. Ferdinand and Miranda tell each other that they love each other, they exchange vows, and they say, we'll love each other forever and ever and ever. And Prospero is very happy about this. It's going exactly according to plan. Meanwhile, scene 2, we get the plotting of Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo. They're all sitting around their keg, drinking still, and Caliban is telling them all about Prospero, and about his weaknesses, how he has this powerful magical book, but if you can catch him when he doesn't have the book, you can kill him, and then take over the island, it'll all be yours. And then you can marry Miranda, Caliban says. And Stefano really likes this idea, but Ariel happens to be flying by and overhears their plot and decides to frustrate it. The first thing he does is cause them to fight with each other by projecting his voice back and forth and pretending to be the different characters, and so saying stupid things so that they start punching each other and fighting with each other. And then he plays this strange music that causes them all to follow. There's an interesting speech by Caliban here which shows him as more than simply a monster. It really shows his softer side. And also his ability to appreciate beauty. Be not afeared, the isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that, if I then had waked after long sleep, will make me sleep again, and then, in dreaming, the clouds methought would open, and show riches ready to drop upon me, that when I waked I would cry to dream again. Scene 3 of Act 3 is perhaps the climax. We think of the climax in a Shakespeare play usually arriving in Act 3. Here's the turning point where all of the villains are taught their lesson. So they're all still having a hard time, and Alonso's still very sad, when all of a sudden these fairies begin to bring this beautiful banquet in front of them, and lay it all out in front of them. And they're awed by this and surprised by this, and as they step forward to eat, this huge harpy, which is Ariel in disguise, swoops down and stomps on all the food and destroys it all, and then accuses them of treachery. Points out all of their faults, particularly their faults against Prospero and the faults against Alonso that Antonio and Sebastian are about to commit. He also tells Alonso that his son is lost forever and tough luck for you. Prospero, meanwhile, is watching and enjoying this performance and enjoying teaching them a lesson. Now, this is the point at which we begin to wonder, is Prospero going to, now that he's got power over his enemies, use it well? Or is he going to continue to be the ineffective ruler and perhaps a cruel ruler? Alonso, in torment at the thought of his dead son, runs to throw himself off a cliff. His friends chase after to attempt to take care of him and keep him from doing harm. And now we're on Act 4, the downward slope, where we're moving towards our resolution. So it starts with Prospero apologizing to Ferdinand for being so gruff, being like, yeah, I just gotta be the tough dad, you know, make sure that Miranda's all taken care of and stuff, make sure you really liked her first, you know. But now that he's sure about Ferdinand, he blesses their wedding and says, yes, you can get married. In fact, I'll give you a show. Let me have my fairies put on this big magical show for you and take care of you. And so he performs this fairy show in which these fairies take on different Greek mythological figures like Ceres, the goddess of grain, and Juno. I guess those Roman names. Anyway, they're all goddesses of bounty and plenty and blessing the wedding bed, but all throughout it there's this sort of subtle threat against Ferdinand, being like, yeah, congratulations on being able to marry my daughter, but if you do anything bad to her, you're toast. Or, if you touch her before the wedding night, you're toast. So they like drive off Venus and Cupid because they're like, don't get too close to these kids in case you get them too stirred up or anything. Here thought they to have done some wanton charm upon this man and maid whose vows are that no bed right shall be paid till Hymen's torch be lighted. Anyway, lots of blessings, subtle threats. But in the middle of the show, as everyone's dancing and singing, Prospero stands up and remembers Caliban's about to kill him. Oops. Shouldn't have forgotten about that. Stop the show! Caliban's gonna kill me! So Ferdinand and Miranda are a little bit frightened by this, but he says, don't worry, I just have some unfinished business to take care of. And he sends them off, and then he calls Ariel and says, oh yeah, remember how Caliban's coming to kill me any minute? Let's stop that. So they hang out some nice clothes on a tree, and when Stefano and Trinculo arrive, ready to do the dirty deed and kill Prospero in his sleep, they see the nice clothes, and instead of going and killing Prospero, as Caliban suggests, they're like, hey, let's try on some clothes first. And Caliban goes, you're idiots. No, just kill him, and then you can do whatever you want, because you'll own the island, but don't wait, do it now. And Ariel and a bunch of fairies, who are transformed into hounds, ready for the hunt, begin to chase them, and bite them, and hunt them all over the island. So much for the plot. Act 5, the conclusion, the denouement of the play. So Prospero is calling up Ariel once again for the 100th time in this play, and he says, hey Ariel, how's everything working out? And Ariel says, that's great, they're frozen. All your enemies are stuck frozen. They can't do anything. By the way, aren't you going to set me free? He says, didn't you say you were going to set me free at the 6th hour? You said that this morning. Remember, this is my time to leave. And Prospero's reply is, I did say so when I first raised the Tempest. Say, my spirit, how fares the king and his followers? So basically, he changes the subject without even really addressing the fact that he's supposed to be freeing Ariel now. Is he going to be a good master and let his servant go free when he's done his tenure? And as Ariel describes the poor, tormented villains that Prospero has frozen and tortured, psychologically at least, he says, your charm so strongly worksome that if you now beheld them, your affections would become tender. Ariel says, yeah, you'd feel bad for these guys if you could just see them. Are you gonna keep tormenting them? Prospero says, dost thou think so, spirit? And Ariel says, mine would, sir, were I human. And so what is Prospero's answer going to be? Is he going to be softened? Is he going to be a benevolent ruler? Or is he going to be cruel and hard? He says, and mine shall. I will be soft towards them. Hast thou, which art but air, touch a feeling of their affections, and shall not myself, one of their kind, that relish all as sharply passion as they, be kindlier moved than thou art? Though with their high wrongs I am struck to the quick, yet with my nobler reason, 'gainst my fury do I take part. So he's taking his reason, his knowledge, and overcoming his rage and his anger towards them. He's overcoming his own power. They being penitent, the sole drift of my purpose doth extend not a frown further. Go, release them, Ariel, my charms I'll break, their senses I'll restore, and they shall be themselves. And as Ariel brings them back in, Prospero reveals his purpose. He's no longer going to be this enchanter, this magician, alone on an island. Instead, he's going to resume his position in Milan, and he's going to cast away his magic. Get rid of this magic that he's clung to for so long, this kind of power, let that go, and instead take his rightful place. No longer being so consumed in this magic that he doesn't do a good job being a duke anymore. And as Ariel helps him bring them in, he says, quickly, spirit, thou shalt ere long be free. So he's finally saying that I'm going to cast off my magic, you're finally going to be free, Ariel. And Ariel sings a song, which is very frequently quoted. It's a little bit of a poem. It says, where the bee sucks, there suck I. In a cowslip's bell I lie. There I couch when owls do cry. On the bat's back I do fly. After summer merrily, merrily, merrily shall I live now, under the blossom that hangs in the bough. So Ariel's finally getting his freedom. He's finally getting to enjoy himself and be able to have autonomy, the thing that Caliban rejected for more servitude. And Prospero sort of bids Ariel a bit of adieu and says that he'll miss him. And so Prospero finally reveals himself to his enemies, and they're all so amazed to find him alive and here and with power over them, and yet benevolent and forgiving to them. And Alonso is very penitent. Now Sebastian and Antonio, much less clear, because they don't hardly say anything throughout this scene. In fact, the only line that Antonio says is when he sees Caliban, he's like, wow, that's a weird fish creature. I bet I could make a buck off of that guy. Which doesn't show his penitence at all. But at least now Prospero has the upper hand and he has control. And Alonso, the one we care about, is penitent, because after all, he thought his son was dead. But now, benevolent Prospero, who's deciding to be nice all of a sudden, decides to show him, hey, guess what? Your son's alive, and he's marrying my daughter. So, yeah. I'm going to be the father of the kings of Naples from now on. And Ferdinand and Miranda are playing chess, because that's a good thing to do with your girlfriend when you can't do anything else, because her dad threatened to kill you. Chess is, again, a power struggle, and might be metaphorical for some other things as well. But Miranda is accusing him of cheating, saying that, you are trying to get the better of me, but I'm gonna have the control here. Which might show, again, how Prospero wants to have control over Naples and over that line. But Miranda's being like all cutesy with him, being like, I don't care, honey, I love everything you do. Mwah, mwah, mwah. And so we're all happy. And then we realize, hey, the boat didn't even sink. Everything's fine. The whole crew's fine. All's well. And look, here's Stefano and Trinculo and Caliban, who are so sorry for everything they've done because they're pinched black and blue. And so Prospero says, and now I'm going home with you. Let's all sail away home safely. And my last bit of magic is to call out for our safe voyage. And we get his closing speech, which if you've read some other Shakespeare plays, particularly the comedies, there's usually a closing speech. Now, the comedies usually end with a character turning to the audience and saying, hey, did you like the play? Why don't you clap for us, please? And so Prospero does that, and the audience, by clapping, is giving him the power to have a safe trip home. This speech is also very famous, and because Tempest is a very late Shakespeare play, it might be sort of his casting off speech, some people have said. Because here, in his speech, he gives up his magic, and he's finally saying, hey, I'm going to be free from all of this, and I'm going to do my job well from now on. Now my charms are all o'erthrown, and what strength I have's mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true, I must be here confined by you, or sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got and pardoned the deceiver, dwell in this bare island by your spell, but release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults. As you from crimes would pardon be, let your indulgence set me free. So Prospero is given the power that he has possessed this whole time and controlled all these people all around. He's finally given it up and said, that power was a good thing to have, I suppose, but it led me down dangerous paths. And I'm casting it off. I'm casting off my magic, I'm casting off everything else, I'm just human now. And the only way I'm going to get off the island is if the audience, who now has the power, sends me. So he gives the power to the audience, the power that we've seen struggling back and forth throughout this whole play. That's my take on Tempest, my description, and my few comments, and I hope that was helpful. Now, I'm going to bed. Good night.
Thanks for watching. Click here to subscribe. Here to watch another video. Here to watch the previous video. Or click on the narwhal and something good is bound to happen.